Thank you all for joining us tonight for our webinar in the Solutions to the Opioid Crisis webinar series from Project Opioid. My name is Amber and we're here tonight to do our Stop and Listen panel so we can hear from peers and allies in recovery. All right, thank you so much. So again, guys, my name is Amber Adario and I work for Project Opioid. I'm the Director of Harm Reduction Outreach and my job is to bring harm reduction resources, specifically Narcan, to our communities where they work, worship, and live, and get them into the hands of those who need it most. Let me start off tonight by telling you a little bit about Project Opioid. We are an organization comprised of stakeholders from business, faith, and philanthropic industries coming together to confront the overdose crisis in their communities and create lasting strategies to impact change on the opioid crisis. We bring to the table leaders that aren't often engaged on these important social issues. With the onset of COVID-19 at the end of last year, at the end of 2019, after quarantine and the tremendous amount of stress that was placed on all of our citizens and people around the world, we experienced some of the greatest increases in overdose deaths. Some communities in Florida saw over a 40% rise in overdoses. So with that, the time is more than ever important for us to be doing the right things to move the needle on the opioid crisis. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank our partners who made this webinar possible. Here in Central Florida, we have Central Florida Cares Health Systems. Located in North Florida, the Jacksonville area, we have LSF Health Systems. And then located in Southeast Florida, we have the Southeast Florida Behavioral Health Network. If you are an individual in need of resources on mental health, behavioral health treatment, please reach out to them if they are in your area. And if you are a peer or looking to become a peer, please reach out to them as well so they can provide you the necessary resources to get started on that new career. And last but not least, this is just one of 9 webinars that we've had this month, and we still have 2 more remaining. So take a moment and visit our website and RSVP for our remaining webinars this month. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for tonight. We have Michelle Canada, who works with the RAISE Project as a certified peer support specialist, and her colleague, Dickie Wade, who also works for the RAISE Project. This is a wonderful organization that brings education and peer support services across our Central Florida communities. They've been doing this for 20 years in Pennsylvania and came down to Florida and realized the great need that we had. And as Floridians, Dickie and Michelle are here to talk to us about what it's like to be a peer support specialist and answer some amazing questions we have for them. We had originally intended on having another gentleman, Travis McAllister, join us tonight, who is a veteran of our military services and also a certified peer support specialist. Unfortunately, duty calls for him, and he is in his home county of Marion County working endlessly, so he's not able to join us tonight. But I felt it was important to highlight the need. So let's go ahead and get started on our webinar this evening and talk with peers and allies on peer support services. Hello, Michelle. Hello, Dickie. Can you guys hear me all right?
Amber, yes. Thanks for having us.
Fantastic. So tonight we're going to go ahead and go through some questions. I will read one off of the slide and we'll give each of you the opportunity to answer, or I will call on one of you to answer the question. So bear with me while I get back onto the slides. Oh, okay, fantastic. So the first question I have for you guys tonight, and Michelle, I'm going to tune into you for this question, is what is a certified recovery peer specialist? And how does that differ from a certified recovery support specialist?
Absolutely. Okay, so A support specialist is someone with lived experience that's also trained to help people, mentor them with who struggle with substance use disorder or mental health disorders. I think it's important to note that that lived experience applies to both the active addiction part, but also it applies to the lived experience of long-term recovery from those disorders as well. Typically, a certified recovery support specialist kind of specializes in substance use disorders, and the peer support specialist specializes in mental health disorders. But in this state, you can have one or the other. You can have either certification and help both populations.
Well, that is just great. Okay, fantastic. So our next question, thank you, Michelle. And for this question, I'd like to hear from both you and Dickie. What drove you to becoming a recovery peer specialist?
I'll go first on this one. You know, I want to say that something bigger than me took me out of the limelight. Part of my career path has always been in entertainment, a dancer, special effects makeup artist, all kinds of stuff, and put me in this seat. So I would have to say that what drove me was kind of following the breadcrumbs along the way, if you will, that put me here. And I haven't regretted it since, honestly. Like, it's been probably one of the most rewarding experiences I've had thus far.
That's amazing to hear. And Michelle?
I would definitely say that, you know, I didn't wake up, you know, one day and be like, I want to be, you know, a recovery peer specialist. I think it's definitely a new way to work with, you know, people like us. And I also think that it's a profession that kind of chooses you. You know, I, you know, come from like a mutual support group that's helped me with my recovery. And it's a very common phrase that is said, you can only keep what you have by giving it away. And so I feel like I got to a point in my recovery where I had this need to feel like I was truly playing a part in making a difference in someone else's life. And I feel like this is the best role to do that on a day-by-day basis.
Thank you, Michelle. So moving on to the next question, and Dickie, I will reach out to you to answer this question for us. How would someone go about becoming a certified recovery peer specialist or a certified recovery support specialist?
In the state of Florida, you have to go through the certification board in order to become certified to be a peer specialist or a recovery specialist and a recovery support specialist. Here in the state of Florida, they require 200 hours of face-to-face time within peer support prior to getting certified. Also, there are educational requirements as far as continuing education credits that you need to obtain. And there's a multitude of resources to be able to get those education credits. It's anywhere from 48 to 70, depending upon, you know, where you get your accreditation from. And then, of course, you will have to have at least 2 years or more in recovery. If you're in a substance use situation, you will definitely have to have two plus years in recovery, and you have to take some tests.
Yes, of course. And I'd like to add, Dickie, that going to your local managing entity, Central Florida Cares here in Central Florida, LSF in North Florida, Southeast Behavioral, and one of the many other managing entities that are out there offer these educational courses for you to get certified, so you can easily reach out to them to get started on that path. Thank you, Dickie. Moving on to our next question, and I'd like to hear from both of you on this one. What is one thing that you wish you would have known when you first began the process of becoming a peer support specialist?
I think for me, it was, I don't have to know all the answers. You know, like I mentioned before, this is a pretty, you know, new industry. And so I think it's important, when we're defining our roles as peer specialists, it's important to note what a peer specialist is not, which is a sponsor or a counselor or a therapist. And so sometimes we work with participants who don't necessarily need, us, giving them suggestions or, telling them this is what they need to do, or diagnosing them or prescribing them something. Sometimes it's just, what I wish I would have known in the beginning is sometimes it's just holding their hand, through a hard time, or just being an ear to listen to. And if things get a little, too deep, it's my job then to kind of coordinate their care and get them connected to the people who are able to help them in those areas. So again, I would say I don't have to have all the answers, but I can point them in the direction to someone who does have those answers.
Thank you, Michelle. And Dickie, did you have any thoughts?
I would say that the number one thing that I wish I would have known is that the to-do list is never ending. Like, it never stops. Like, I think when I had first started, I thought, oh, let's just start this to-do list. And then at the end of the week, that to-do list would be done, but it's just ever evolving, and accepting that the process is different every single time. Similar to what Michelle said, each person has individual needs that are different, and getting them to a point of being stable is kind of one of the biggest objectives that I know that we try to do, is help stabilize, and what that's going to look like is defined by them. Like, they're the ones that get to decide, like, this is my problem, this is my problem, this is my problem. And generally, once we address those issues, maintaining either abstinence or their definition of recovery is generally easily obtainable once stability is achieved.
It really does speak to that individualized care. Yes, thank you, Dickie. Moving on to our next question. What has been your biggest challenge as a peer, and what did you do to overcome it? Michelle?
I think for me, my biggest challenge was separating my work from my life, because I'm a person in long-term recovery as well. And so I'm working with, participants in the same boat. And so for me, I had to set very clear boundaries with myself about when I'm at work and when I need to take care of my own personal recovery, because I've learned many times that I'm not much use to others if, my own house isn't in order, so to speak. And so for me, what that looked like was just, very clearly communicating with my participants. I am available, these hours, of course, I'm going to be flexible, but at some point, I'm going to have to kind of take care of me as well. So I guess that was my biggest challenge.
Thank you, Michelle. And Dickie?
I would have to say that the biggest challenge that I face as a peer would be finding appropriate resources for clients or participants, excuse me. That can be some of the hardest things for us to accomplish, is finding the right resource to connect to a participant because they don't check the boxes that need to be checked at this time. But having been a part of the process of recovery for as long as I have, I've seen that once they're again stable, those boxes become checked. You know what I mean? So it's a catch-22. So finding the access to resources, I would say, is one of the biggest things that I face on a day-to-day.
Thank you, Dickie. For our next question, where do you believe that we need to have CRPS and CRSSs staffed to help those who may be ready to seek help or treatment? Michelle?
Definitely any first responders, EMTs, ambulances, police departments. I think our society has, looked at substance use disorders and mental health disorders as defects, and that just contributes to this awful stigma. And I think oftentimes in those situations, those people are at very, very dark points in their lives. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like a peer would just be very useful in that situation to kind of, give them hope, uplift them instead of, giving them a consequence or whatnot, or belittling them or shaming them. I think that first responders for sure need to have certified peer support specialists in that department.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. And Dickie, your thoughts?
I would definitely have to agree with Michelle. And additionally, in long-term facilities like jails, mental institutions, or health centers, there would definitely need to be peers there as well. I know locally here, it's really hard within our particular jail system for any kind of peers to get in, which just kind of creates this looping cycle, So I think that being able to partner with law enforcement and first responders, similar to what Michelle has said, we're able to make changes instead of like the same hamster wheel running over and over and over and over. And there's been results in Miami and their outreach programs and diversion programs out there. There's been some significant results. So.
Thank you. For our next question, and bear with me, this is a long one. What can behavioral health treatment centers, clinicians, doctors, and other members of the healthcare system do to help better support our peers and maximize their ability to help those in need?
I think that goes back to kind of something that I said, earlier on. It's just, well, number one, understanding what our role is very important, I think, for the other professions. I think sometimes it gets misconstrued or it's just misunderstood to begin with. And likewise, I feel that it's important for treatment centers, clinicians, doctors to know that we aren't trying to replace them or we're not trying to do their work. I want for them to realize that we only want to enhance the treatment, and it all goes back to what the participant needs. We just want to care for our participants. And so, I think it just goes back to understanding what our role is and understanding that we're just trying to enhance the process as a whole.
Thank you, Michelle. And Dickie, your thoughts?
Better staff education, definitely informing all of the staff members that are hands-on patients on what a peer does, what our actual position is. Because a lot of times I'll be sitting in a facility and I'll just be sitting there trying to figure out what am I supposed to do, because I'm not getting sometimes the direction isn't coming to me because a lot of the staff doesn't understand what our actual role is. We're not a treatment provider. We are there to walk alongside people as they're making some difficult decisions. So I think that is an integral part of it being effective, and understanding that we're kind of a bridge. We're not completely professional and we're not unprofessional. We're right in the middle. So that tends to make us be able to affect change on an individual level. But
thank you, Dickie. Moving on to our next question. What do you want employers to understand when considering hiring a peer, or simply just hiring an individual in recovery?
That we have fought so hard to get to be employed, that simply put, and I feel like sometimes people in recovery have to hold themselves up to such a high standard, because there's that stigma always in the back of our mind that we don't belong there anyway. We don't belong in the workplace to begin with, and we certainly aren't adequate or eloquent enough or good enough or educated enough to be there. So I guess what I would want employers to know is, I don't want to say, take it easy on us, but just treat us like normal people, I guess is what I'm saying. you know, and I think it's so cool that I work with people in recovery who understand, you know, my thought processes, and they can, you know, they can very easily sense, you know, when I am just having a bad day. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, oh, are you okay? You know, like that's serious. You know, I just want to be treated like a normal person, I guess is what I'm saying. If that makes any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. Not having that extra layer of caution because you've worked
Absolutely.
to just being treated like everyone else. Dickie, your thoughts?
That our past don't define us. We learn and we grow from being in recovery. We definitely change for the better significantly. I mean, like, even in cases of relapse, like I've experienced people that can't go to the same places that they once were. One of the biggest things that I've heard is we didn't know what we didn't know. At the time when my life was the worst, I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And I reacted the best way that I knew how, given the tools that I was given at that time. And since getting into recovery, life has changed significantly for me. Like, my toolbox has expanded. I know how to handle things a lot better than I used to. And additionally, one of the most, I would have to say, freeing experiences that I've been on has been going to an interview where I was able to openly talk about addiction and what it's done to me, and any previous charges or anything like that, any legal issues, being able to talk about that stuff openly and freely and not feel like I was being judged. In fact, being like, wow, you could really help someone. So understanding that we can learn and we can grow is one of the biggest things that I would say any employer needs to hear, hiring a potential, you know, I guess, person in recovery, you know.
Thank you, Dickie. For our next question, what do you want the public to understand about what it's like to be in recovery from a substance use disorder or even just from a mental health disorder? Michelle?
I think, like all people, we just want to feel connected. Do you know what I mean? We want to feel reconnected with, you know, society. You know, I've heard it, you know, described as like, you wouldn't treat a cancer patient, you wouldn't shun a cancer patient for having cancer. Do you know what I mean? Or, you know, a diabetes patient for having diabetes. And I think it could be treated the same way. You know, we aren't bad people trying to get good, we're sick people trying to get well, so to speak. And I would just say, like, as best as possible, you know, include us, you know, treat us with dignity, respect, kindness. You know, we aren't bad people.
Thank you, Michelle. Dickie, your thoughts?
That initially, when we're first getting into recovery, is the kind of turning point for a lot of us, myself included, that when I had first got into recovery, I was dealing with trauma, pain, confusion, abandonment, mistrust, like all of this nature of very negative mindsets when I first came into recovery. And I didn't know how to handle that because it was the first time in many, many years that I had ever really came face to face with those feelings, and I didn't know what to do, how to do it. So just kind of take it easy, especially on a newly recovering person. Instead of shaming them, you know, you're doing this, a better question might be to say, what can I do to help? How can I help you today? That's probably one of the most pivotal things that anybody could ask me is, how can I help you today? And a lot of times it's just listen, you know, just listen, just hear me.
That really speaks to, thank you, Dickie, that really speaks to almost another follow-up question of what would you like someone who is a friend or family or partner who's following along this journey in recovery for this individual to use those same thoughts and to understand the impact of our words on those individuals. Moving on to the next question. Now, this one is a little bit more personal. When you were seeking help at the beginning of your journey in recovery, where could the system of care have been to better give you access to the resources you needed sooner? Michelle?
I would say definitely like the hospital environment. I remember a few years ago, I was in a very deep psychosis and I was admitted to the hospital, and I was, not in my right mind. And it's so crazy because I vividly remember it still to this day, 4 years later. This nurse, she's looking at me in the eye and she's like, "This is real bad. This is real bad. What are you doing? You need to call your parents. You need to do this. You need to do that." And it was very traumatic. I still remember it vividly today. And eventually, I got transported to a psychiatric facility. And then eventually I went to a rehabilitation center where there were, people put in place that were able to help me. But definitely, I feel like I could have been saved from some trauma had there been a peer support specialist in that hospital setting to let me know exactly what Dickie was just saying, like, what's going on? Are you okay? How can I help you? So definitely, I would say that the hospital environment for sure.
Thank you, Michelle. And Dickie, for you?
Access to care, honestly, is one of probably the biggest things that I remember. I know that when I had first attempted to get into recovery, I was maybe 21 years old, and very, very similar to Michelle. I was in a state of psychosis, and I was at the hospital, and I could remember I was so far gone mentally, like I didn't think I was ever going to come back, honestly. And I could remember busting into, I think it was a Walgreens, and in the middle of the night, and I just wanted help, and I thought people were after me, and trying to force Walgreens to call the cops was really difficult, honestly. Like, they were not going to call the cops, and then getting into the hospital, I think understanding the nature of what it entails to come into recovery, and not necessarily just Baker acting someone right away, or even though I believe that it's there for a purpose, like I'm not saying that Baker acting isn't relevant, but also maybe a better triage system at the hospital to better identify when there's drug use present, that it might not just be, a behavioral health issue, or vice versa, being able to correctly triage what's happening. Because for myself, like, I was thrown into a behavioral health system, which I needed also, but it wasn't the primary need, I think, at the time for me. So I really had never had access to treatment centers, rehabs, nothing like that was at my fingertips. And not having insurance or the ability to pay for it, it definitely was not at my fingertips. So I think access to care was probably one of the biggest issues that I faced, and that over a decade ago. So.
Thank you, Dickie. For our next question, before we go to the audience, if they have any questions they would like to ask, what is one thing you want the public to understand about the stigma placed on individuals in recovery? And since we don't unfortunately have Travis here with us, I'd like to give you the opportunity to expand on that to more than one thing, because I'm sure there is more than one thing for each of you.
I think first and foremost, it takes a lot of courage to, say out loud, I am a person in recovery. I think that there are, mutual support groups that whose premise is solely based on anonymity. And I think in some ways, maybe further adding to the stigma of, I am in recovery, I need to be, ashamed of that fact. but I always say, guilt and shame, fueled my addiction. And so I refuse to be guilty and I refuse to be shameful in my recovery, period. But I also want the public to know that even though, I'm in a position where I get to, say every single day of my life, I am in recovery, it does not mean that the stigma has been erased for me, because it appears almost everywhere in my life. When I'm trying to get housing, and I tell the person, because they ask, where'd you live before this? Well, I lived in a recovery home, and I get that look. Well, how long have you been in recovery? Do you know what I mean? Or like we've discussed already, with access to care or in the healthcare industry, that stigma follows us everywhere, no matter how long we've had in recovery, I think. So I don't know, I would also want the public to just realize that it's just so much easier to love people. It's so much easier to accept people and to educate yourself than to, hate people or to shame people. Yeah, I think that's a few things that I would want the public to know for sure.
Thank you, Michelle. And Dickie?
I would have to say that the stigma does, it drives further darkness and further mess for those trying to change their lives, and it's interesting because you take, for instance, and I'm going to do a hypothetical situation here. If you have a mother who's talking about the addict's neighbor next door, and then there's a 5-year-old son sitting there who hears the mother talking about the addict next door, and flash forward maybe 7 years for that 5-year-old son to then be 12 and hooked on some kind of substance, and they're so it's intrinsically ingrained in them that they're bad people, not that they're sick people trying to get better if they're trying to get into the position of recovery. The stigma just, it closes more doors than it opens, word choice, and even myself, I'm guilty of poor word choice sometimes, not understanding the impacts of what I'm saying. And I think that taking the time to really educate myself as well as others about what word choice can do and how it can impact somebody on a deeper level is very important for anyone, really. And that the stigma is closing more doors than it's opening. It's not helping anyone, even the victims of an addiction, not the person who is addicted, but those who've been wrecked by addiction by proxy, because addiction doesn't happen to an individual, it happens to an army of people. So if we're closing the door on that one person, we're closing the door on that army of people. We're closing the door on the mothers, the fathers of that person. We're literally writing a lot of names on a lot of tombstones. And that's really important to me, having lost as many people as I've lost along the way. So I'm a person in long-term recovery, and whatever is thrown at me because of that, I'll be strong enough to handle, so that I don't have to see more names on more tombstones, because that's really what's happening. And it's a multitude of problems, and it goes beyond this. That's the reality. Stigma expands beyond addiction, and that's something that we need to bring to the forefront of our minds. And the reality is if it isn't your business, it's not your business. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to understand is what's our business and what's not. And if we don't want to help, then let's not hurt,
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dickie. Now, while I give the audience a chance to go into the chat or go into the Q&A section and submit your questions, I'd like to hear from Michelle and from Dickie a little bit about their stories. Please feel comfortable to share whatever you want to share, and whatever you don't want to share, do not feel obligated to do so. Thank you. Michelle?
Absolutely. Thanks again for having us, Amber. So like Dickie, I I also came from a performing background. Um, and what I discovered was that I loved that industry because it gave me a chance to escape. It was, it was a way for me to escape my feelings, um, my emotions, my thoughts, whatever. And also, what I discovered is that in that industry, there's a lot of partying, and so very quickly, I went down this downward spiral of just partying. And I always say to people, especially my participants, when I'm sharing my life with them, I say that my bottom didn't necessarily look like homelessness or incarceration or whatever, but my bottom was this deep spiritual, emotional bottom where I couldn't realize how I had gotten there. I knew that if I were to keep using drugs, I was going to die, but I also felt like if I stopped using drugs, I was going to die. So I'm glad I didn't die. I got help, and I've been in the Brevard County area for 3 years now, where I have been living at a recovery home for women called the Glass House. I've been there for almost 3 years, and I currently am the house manager there. And that has kind of been my doorway into doing some of this type of work. I think the difference, obviously, between being a house manager and being a peer specialist is that I'm not telling my participants what to do, so to speak, and also there's not this level of I don't know, like hierarchy, I guess. I always tell my participants, I'm no better than, no worse than. I am too, but an addict in recovery. And I think the best way that I can describe it is that I just try to be one of the best versions of recovery that my participants have in their lives. Like I mentioned before, I got to the point in my recovery where I was seeking more. I was seeking more. I wanted to, I didn't feel like I had a purpose in my life, even back when I was performing. Like, my sole purpose was to perform on this stage to get accolades from people because I wasn't okay with myself, because I needed some self-validation. And today in recovery, my mind has shifted to that of service, that of helping my fellow man, my fellow woman. And that's a miracle, because I never used to think that way at all. And so I don't know, I just feel really blessed to be able to get up every morning and, like I said, really feel like I am making a difference, playing a small part, in someone's life, and helping them, achieve, what I have been able to achieve, because people in roles like mine did the same thing for me, if that makes any sense. Just kind of like in a nutshell, who I am, why I'm here, why I do what I do.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
And Dickie, would you mind telling us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. So for me, I mean, drugs and alcohol started when I was young. I was probably 7, I think, the first time that I'd ever had any kind of substance. And I can remember there was some like abuse in the home, and there were some traumas that were starting. I didn't know that they were traumas until later, because again, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I can remember the first time that I had a substance, and it took me out of fear and worry and the pain that I was going through, because early on I was taught that I wasn't good enough by certain influences. There were other, good positive influences too, but unfortunately, my brain latched on to the negative influences. And so I remember kind of seeking out that escape, that escape from self, really. And I too found it in the limelight, you know, becoming a different character or performing in ways to get those accolades. You know, it took a long time for me to realize that that wasn't the real me, you know what I mean? That I was constantly trying to play character in every situation that I was in, whether I was actually on stage or not. I was always playing a character because I was so afraid of who I was because of how I was taught coming up, you know? And I mean, coming out as a gay man was difficult too. It forced me to change my belief system in what spirituality is. I was initially told that I was going to go to hell when I came out. So that totally just changed my viewpoint on spirituality. So at that point, I just started really only relying on myself. And I am not the best teacher to myself when I'm like a young kid or teenager at that. And by the time I was 16 or 17, I was left calling the shots for the most part. And I mean, if anyone's seen The Lord of the Flies, you can probably guess how that turned out. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Like the more I chose to party, the more I only cared about that escape, the more it took for me to escape, the more drugs that it took, the more alcohol that it took. It just drove me to a point of literally insanity, like complete psychotic insanity. And I told you a little bit about the first time that I went to get clean, and that was in that Walgreens and calling for help. And I could remember getting thrown into a mental institution, and like I was nutso. I was walking around talking to mirrors, thinking I was on reality TV, and I wasn't. I was doing all kinds of stuff that just was synonymous with psychosis and drug-induced psychosis. And eventually somebody, I think it was this guy, gave me a butterscotch candy. And it was like that moment when my head just clicked back to reality. I mean, for 7 or 8 days, I was getting Thorazine shots, and they were giving me all kinds of medications. And that piece of butterscotch kind of brought me back to life. And I think that that's kind of what I try to do today, is give that piece of butterscotch, that hand reaching out saying, you know, let me help you out of the darkness like that person did for me. And there's more to that story. As far as, you know, even in the ambulance ride to the hospital, like I could remember an EMT in there saying, I know exactly what happened, and I know exactly where you are. You can be honest with me and tell me. I've been in recovery for a very long time, and I'm here to help you. And just, there were these little indicators along the way that just told me to keep going. And when I had gotten out of the behavioral health center, I could remember I didn't have anywhere to go. My family didn't want much to do with me. And getting out it was a climb. It was an absolute climb. It was a struggle to get into recovery and maintain it. Not only did I have my own emotional well-being and mental capacities to work on, and my ability to be employable and maintain paying bills and things like that, but you know, I had a lot of damage I had done to that family that I had perceived to continually hurt me, even though they literally spoke their belief system, and it changed almost as almost when they spoke it, they changed, you know. So I think you know, if I were to be able to say where I really come from and where I'm at today is it's night and day. Today I'm a productive member of society. I pay all my bills, and I have a really close relationship with my family. I've done a lot of forgiving to the trauma that's in my past. I address my behavioral health issues. I address potential health issues as well. And I think that the mountains that come along the way in recovery can be walked if somebody's with you. And unfortunately, like, relapse is a part of my story. I wish that I could say that the first time I I went into recovery, that's exactly what happened. I got into recovery and it was magic. It wasn't magic. But I did a lot of learning that first time, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, until eventually I realized that life was just better without using a drink or a drug. And that no matter what happened, I'd be okay, provided I didn't do that. And the proof is in the pudding for me. The proof is, I've been through cancer treatment and recovery. I've been through other medical issues. I've been through a lot of loss, family, sponsorship from mutual aid groups, all kinds of stuff. But I'm still here, and I still make a choice not to use on a daily basis. And that's changed my life for the better. And if I can be that person handing out that piece of butterscotch, then I will, so.
Thank you, Dickie. And thank you, Michelle. Those were two very heartfelt stories from each of you. I have a few questions here from the audience, and let me go ahead and read one of them. This is an important one we haven't yet touched on. Given that both of you are part of communities that are marginalized, even in today's society, how do you feel that has that created obstacles, or has it hindered you in any way seeking help?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. It's, for me, I used to describe it as, I don't know, just like one more tally on the whiteboard, so to speak. Like, it's tough enough being African-American in America. It's tough enough being an African-American transgender woman in America. And then now you want to throw substance use disorder in the mix as well, like kind of 3 strikes, you're out, right? So personally, it felt like, kind of like the worst combination, like to be who I am and to live where I live. Literally, you got Black, you got a trans woman, and you got an addict, okay? But today, I don't view those things as hindrances, despite, the stigma, like Dickie was sharing, despite all of the stigma and the hate and the shame that's thrown my way, honestly, on a daily basis, sometimes. I don't see those things as hindrances. I see them as assets, but it took a lot of resilience. It took a lot of self-care. It took a lot of self-discovery, a lot of work on myself to get to that point, to know that I can use those, those truths about myself as assets to help someone else. I think that's the whole point, like I said, of the role that we play as peer specialists is to help someone else, to let them know that, they aren't alone, that, I've been through this as well. And how I kind of like to envision it is that I have some crazy beliefs, but I believe that I, at some point, chose to live this experience before I was even like fully realized in this body. I feel like my spirit likes a challenge and chose all of these, things so that I can come out on the other side and be an advocate for marginalized, underprivileged groups in this country. But I will say times are changing, though. I will say times are changing, and people are waking up. And it's because, people like Dickie and myself are stepping up despite the fear, despite fear or anxiety. And we're using our voices to advocate for people like us who don't have voices, who are too afraid to use their platforms. Because, truth be told, I used to be that very recently, afraid to use my platform. But, people like me had to do it before me. People like us literally died so that we could have, freedoms. So yes, I do think, being in these marginalized groups definitely contributes to stigma. It's definitely been a rough road, but because I didn't give up on myself and on what I believe in, my life today it truly is amazing despite the stigma. It is.
That's fantastic to hear, Michelle.
Thank you.
Much. And Dickie?
I mean, what more can I say? Michelle summed it all up there. That was awesome. Personally, I think it is just about learning that that I have value, right? Like I have to believe that I have value. And getting to that point was difficult, and it took a plethora of people to get me to that point. It took a lot of influence from people that were positive and cared, much like myself, what I do today, that were able to teach me to love myself, because that's always been my problem, right? So now I struggle from maybe loving myself too much sometimes, and I can be real loud and boisterous, and especially if I perceive some, a marginalized area being, a target, then I'll raise my voice, and that's the call to action that I have, is I have a very strong and powerful voice when I choose to use it. And I have to access something bigger than me when I'm fearful of not walking the right path or doing the right things. Luckily, I'm okay with shaking things up a little bit. I'm okay with shaking belief systems up in people. I'm okay with people not liking me today. I'm okay saying I'm in recovery from drug addiction. Yes, I used every drug there is, and multiple times and all together. And stop me today. Stop me from growing. Stop me from rising. Stop me from helping the next one. Stop me. That's the biggest thing, because there's a lot of people out there that are just, all they need is that piece of butterscotch. They just need that handout. That's all they need. And I think that there might be a lot of fear-based thinking within stigma, honestly, a fear that someone may come along and knock them off of self-righteousness. That it's a lot easier to put a group of people down than accept who they are. And I had to face that within myself. My own belief system had to change about who I was. It had to. Internally, what I was taught was different than who I was. So when I had this fight going on with who I am and who I was taught to be, you know what I mean? And when they were conflicting, I had to learn who I was. And when I learned that, I became a voice. I became a powerhouse in affecting change, both locally and larger. I'm able to make change today. And I think that anybody really is able to make change if they have the strength to stand up against stigma. And that's all stigma. That's in a sense of behavioral health, in a sense of substance use disorder, Black, gay, transgender, female, male, that exists too. I think we forget that there's other stigmas as well. And the way to do it is to eradicate it. It's to change the verbiage. It's to change the behavior. And that's the honest to God truth, in my opinion, is that if we change the behavior, we're removing the stigma altogether. If we change the language, we're removing it altogether. And that takes work. And I think that taking that work internally, personally, is how I make change. Because again, I'm not perfect, unfortunately. I wish I was, but I'm not. That's part of my problem, is I wish I was perfect and I'm not. And being open to when I am contributing to stigma. I think that's one of the biggest things that I had to do, was open myself up. Where am I contributing to stigma? And I change when I can, and I'm able to have uncomfortable conversations about what may or may not hurt somebody. Like, oh, I don't know how it is to be in your shoes. Tell me about this. Talk to someone. Changing stigma is about connection. It's about talking to someone. It's about asking the hard questions. How does it feel when you hear, that's how you change it. So.
Thank you so much, Dickie. As many of our therapists would tell us, we have to learn how to be uncomfortable and have to sit with that, because that's how we make those changes. We can't be looking to make ourselves not uncomfortable, because then we're living in denial. Okay, I think we have time for just one more question here, and this question is from the audience as well, and it goes back to employment. You both mentioned a little bit about the barriers to employment and into housing specifically. What are your thoughts and comments to employers when it comes to individuals that have gone through these experiences and likely have criminal records? Michelle or Dickie?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think I think, Dickie hit the nail on the head, a while back when he said our past, they don't have to define us, and they truly don't, because the reality is a lot of people who have criminal backgrounds have done all of the stuff they needed to do to remedy the situation. They aren't on probation anymore. They're not on parole anymore. They've paid the fines. They've made their court appearances, and they still have this record. But they have paid their dues. I think that's the best way to put it. And if they haven't, let them do that, and then let them move on from their lives. Move on with their lives. That's kind of how I see it. Everyone in this country has committed a crime at some point. Okay, everyone has. Have you sped before? Yes. Okay. Have you jaywalked before? Yes. Every single person in this country has committed a crime. Did everyone get caught? No. That's kind of how I see it. Are they committing crimes today? That's what I would ask them. Are there any new crimes? Your last crime was what, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Are you doing the same stuff today? No. That's kind of how I see it. Just let people move on, because what it does is when they don't have access to housing, or they don't have access to employment, they need to make a living. It's crazy out there as it is for someone with a good job and 40 hours a week. Okay, let's speak to it. So they're going to go back to doing the same stuff, and then they're going to end up getting incarcerated again. It's just this perpetual cycle. There needs to be more jail reentry programs, and more people advocating for just change when it comes to all of that, because it's just beating a dead horse at this point. Like I said, I think if they have paid their dues, which 90% of them have, to be honest, most of them have, and they aren't doing the same stuff, just let the past be in the past.
Well,
give them an opportunity to grow.
Thank you, Michelle. And yes, Dickie, you did touch on that earlier. It really just speaks to the need for compassion and understanding, and not defining people by their past. And like you said, Michelle, they've paid their dues. Well, I thank you both so much for joining me here today. We are just about out of time. So I'd like to just take a moment again and thank our partners for making this possible. Central Florida Cares Health Systems here in Orlando, LSF Health Systems in Jacksonville serving North Florida, and Southeast Florida Behavioral Health Network serving Southeast Florida. I encourage you to seek them out if you are in need of services, or to seek out the managing entity in your area if you are not covered under these regions. They are here to provide those services for you, including getting you the education you need if you are a person in recovery and would like to become a certified peer support specialist, or if you're an ally to someone in recovery and would like to become a recovery support specialist. So one more time, please check out our website for the other webinars left in our series. We do have 2 more on Wednesday. Go to projectopioid.org to RSVP or to watch our previous webinars. So again, thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you, Dickie, for joining us for our Stop and Listen panel, where we heard from peers and allies in recovery.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have a wonderful evening.
You too.